Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 91. We can also say Good Yontif, being that today is Tes-Yud Kislev, the Chag HaGeula, redemption of the Mitteler Rebbe in the year Tovkuf Pei Zayin. Tovkuf Pei Zayin, and that year actually, after the redemption, the next year, because of the histalkus of the Mitteler Rebbe on Tes-Yud Kislev, so literally a day before the anniversary of the Geula, the Mitteler Rebbe passed away, Tovkuf Peiches Tes-Yud Kislev, which was yesterday. It's also his birthday. So the Mitteler Rebbe's birthday and the Yortzeit is on, Stalkus is on Tes-Yud Kislev, and the next day is the Chag HaGeula. So that year it was a subdued celebration due to the Histalkus of the Mitteler Rebbe. But, as the years afterwards showed, it became a day of celebration. Yud Kislev, the Geula of the Mitteler Rebbe. So I want to begin by talking a little about that, and in the spirit, of course, of Chassidus Applied. So we know all the Rabbeim, all the 7 Rabbeim, as I've mentioned a number of times from the Sikha of Shabbos Pasha Vayetze Tovshin Yud, where the Rebbe said why it's called Shalshal Se'er, why he wrote Shalshal Se'er on the top of the Sharblat of all the Sforim of the Rabbeim, not Shalshal HaMoyer, because in Moyer is stuck in the Shtalshlos. The Moyer is all one. So the 7 generations are really all one. In Eir, in the way they transmitted, each one has their particular tziyur, each particular fashion. As the Rebbe would always say, mihu zev ezahu, that can start going in Fananda Parkenzach and start deciding what each Rebbe is. But we have from the Rabbein themselves what they said, that the Alter Rebbe was sefiros HaChochmeh, Mitteler Rebbe is Bina, the Tzemach Tzedek is Das, the Rebbe Marash is a Netzach, the Rebbe Rashab Heid, and as the Friedrich Rebbe said, noch kommt Yesod. And so for us, Der Ashvi would be Malchus. So the Mitteler Rebbe is Bina, and you see it throughout his whole Torah. First of all, the simple Recheves Hanar, which is Recheves Hanar of Bina. Chochmeh is considered the spark on Nekuda. Nekuda Behechala. The Bina is the Hisrachvus, the expansion of that point. So when we have an idea, a concept, that would be the Alter Rebbe, the concentrated concept, all in that concentrated point. But then comes the spashtus of it, in the letters of the Shem Havaya. There's the Yud and there's the Hey. So the Yud is a point and the Hey expands upon it. That's Bina. And you see it, that for every line that the Alter Rebbe wrote, you could say that the Mitteler Rebbe probably wrote 50 lines. I'm not saying an exact number, but you just see from the length of the discourses that the Mitteler Rebbe elaborates on the Alter Rebbe's Maimorim is completely, you can't even compare the two in lengthwise. And then you also see that Mitteler Rebbe himself was also a publisher. The Alter Rebbe published Tanya, but the rest of the Sfarim, the Alter Rebbe, Likutei Terei, Likutei Teira, and so on, were published later by the Tzemach Tzedek. And the Alter Rebbe said them. The Mitteler Rebbe actually published Sfarim after Sfarim, a whole list. Imre Bina, Derech Chaim, Shari Tshuva, Shari Eira, Shar HaMunah, Shar HaYichud, and with names, and you'll see always the word Shar. Nun, what's Shar? Shar is a gate. Shar refers to Bina. You have Chamishim Share Bina, the 50 gates of Bina. By Chochmah you say Lamed Beis Nesivos Chochmah, 32 paths of Chochmah. But Shar indicates on a gate. So there again you see the hint of Bina in the Mitteler Rebbe. And there's more to that as well. And when the Rebbe explains this idea, he speaks about it, that what is the Mitteler Rebbe's so-called contribution, he took the Nekudus of the Alter Rebbe and turned it into a long, and you can say comprehensive, encyclopedic, comprehensive take on these concepts in Chassidus. So it introduced a whole new dimension understanding Chassidus, which by the Alter Rebbe was far more concentrated. Like if you think of Mishnah and Gemara, you could say Mishnah is the Lashon Kotzer, it's brief, and the Gemara elaborates on it. So what it means to us in our lives, that there's 2 parts of Chassidus. There's of course the Alter Rebbe is the foundation, the Miyasir of Teres Chassidus Chabad, and the Mitteler Rebbe is the Harchava in our lives, and our applying it to us is it's Chassidus. For it to really have an impact, you have to have the Chochmah plus the Bina. Because when you have the point itself, even though it may be very clear, but without the details, as the Mitteler Rebbe actually himself explains in the introduction to Shari Yichud, how his bonus And the Rebbe cites it very often, how his bonus, contemplation, it's not enough just to think in general, you have to get it down to the specifics and to details. A few other interesting things that we can learn from the Mitteler Rebbe. Taking the Sichas is a very powerful Sikha that I would definitely encourage everyone to learn and read. It's in sefiros Sichas Tov Shemem Zayin, Shabbos Pasha Vayetze, Yud Aleph Kislev. The Rebbe speaks at length about the Mitteler Rebbe, a number of things. Of course, the Mitteler Rebbe, it's gewünschen. He wished that when Chassidim meet, they should, in the street even, they should talk about Elokus. There's different expressions. It says that when they meet, I'll just give you all the Lashenis, different places. It's all brought here in the Sikha here. She says when two Jews meet, they should talk Binyonei Chassidus. That's in sefiros Sichas Tov Shin Aleph Amud 52. Elsewhere he says they should talk about Mamala and Seviv. And then elsewhere he says you should talk about Yichudi Allah and Yichudi Tata. That's sefiros Sichas Tov Shin Beis Amud 104. And then finally Arech and Atik. That's in Beis Rebbe Chelik Beis Perek Aleph in the Hara there. And that you should understand Keser like we understand the 5 fingers. That's what the Mitteler Rebbe wanted. We also know that Samach Tzedek said about him that if he would cut his shver, which was the Mitteler Rebbe, was his father-in-law, also uncle but father-in-law, he said blood wouldn't come out but Chassidus. So, to me, and I share this with you, it's a tremendous inspiration in applying Chassidus to our lives. This isn't just talk Chassidus when you're sitting in a shir, or talking Chassidus when you're giving a shir, giving a class, or when you're Shabbos morning or Friday night or in Seder Yeshiva. When two Chassidim meet, they should be talking about Chassidus, which means in the simple street, in their mundane activities. You could say, how is that possible? What does Chassidus have to do with the mundane involvement? I'll designate time. Because that's what Chassidus is meant to be, to permeate, saturate our lives, apply to every detail, no matter what you're doing, there's a lakus in it. And Chassidus reveals the godliness in it. Everything you do. Whether it's the work, whether it's B'chol D'rechecha Deo, Chol Masech L'Shem Shamayim, everything has in it lessons that you can learn of Chassidus, and to know Keser like you know your 5 fingers. So it's not just that we should know the esoteric concepts, like you know your 5 fingers. It means because the esoteric concepts should be as relevant as your 5 fingers are to you. So that's another thing. Another thing I'd like to share, always the Chlevusa de Milsa, this is lesser known. When we had the schus, I had the schus of preparing the Hanochas on those years, starting from Tavshin Nametes, Tavshin Mem. So Yud Kislev was a Fabrengen Tavshin Mem, Aleph. And the Rebbe said then, that's just like the Chag Gul of the Alter Rebbe, the Gul of the Alter Rebbe did what? Afterwards, as the Baal Shem Tov, the Maggid instructed, then when he asked the question in prison, should he continue spreading Chassidus, he said even more than before. And we can see in the Maimorim that before Peterburg, as it's called, you see the Maimorim are Ketzorim, are shorter, more, even in Chachma itself, even more brief. And afterwards, as the Rebbe Rashab says in Teres Shalom, that Seleitzach, that after Peterburg started the Ikar of Yefutzim and Esach Chutza with the Alter Rebbe being marchiv and elaborating, and which is indicated in many places. But that's all in Chokmah. The Rebbe said Al Derech Zeh with the Mitteler Rebbe that the Kitrug was also a Chassidus. In this Sikha Mem Zayin he says that the more Bapratis in detail the Kitrug, which means the so-called challenge in heaven, the Alter Rebbe was on Chassidus, by the Mitteler Rebbe was on Rebbe and Chassid. Here's not the place to go into that. But generally it's Chassidus and the spreading of Chassidus. So we see also after the Geula of the Mitteler Rebbe started the Harchava, a new level of spreading Chassidus even more than by the Alter Rebbe. So we asked the question, the Geula of the Mitteler Rebbe was in, as I said, Tovkuf Pei Zayin. The last year of Chaim Chayuse Be'al Medain. Most of his writing was before that. By the Alter Rebbe Taki, you see, besides Tanya, you see that most of the expanded writings started after the Geula in Tov Kuf Nun Tes of Yud Tes Kislev. But what about the Mitteler Rebbe? It was all written, that Harchava, that extent that we see was beforehand. And the Rebbe wrote an answer, which is printed actually in Tavshin Mem Zayin, we included it. But he wrote it in Tavshin Mem Aleph on our question in the Sikha. And the Rebbe said, it's the Hara 31 on page 105 in sefiros Sichos Tavshin Mem Zayin, that even though most of the Torah of the Mitteler Rebbe, in a form of Harchava, a form of expansive form, were said and written before the Geula, not like the Alter Rebbe the other way around. The Rebbe wrote these words, The purpose of these writings was that they should be studied and they should be spread. Without any persecution from the mamshala, from the government then. And the shleimus of this type of spreading happened after the Geula. So it's true, it's an interesting point. It's true that the Mitteler Rebbe wrote before the Geula this way, but the purpose of it all is that it should get out there. And that, the Geula broke through that door. So it's different than by the Alter Rebbe. If I bring over this, but the Rebbe wrote that ha'ar. But you see from this another point which I want to make. The Rebbe once wrote to someone, Kimedumani, sometimes the Rebbe would write that tongue-in-cheek, so to speak. Kimedumani, I assume or I think that the Lashon, I'm talking about the Lashon Mashiach said to the Baal Shem Tov when he asked him, when are you going to come? He says, Kimedumani, Lashon hu yafutsu v'lo yatfisu ma'nesacha chutza. To spread the wellsprings outward, not to print. Very often by Fabrengs, the Rebbe would say, half mockingly and half disturbed by it, that me read, the noch verschreibt man das, und me druckt das up, me legt das auf the Politzer. Which means you print it, and you write it, and print it, and then put it on the shelves. That's not just to print it, but it's yefutzu, hafatzosa. So the Mitteler Rebbe Taka wrote a lot, but the point is hafotza, which is our job. In simple English, it means distribution. You can have all the Chassidus, but there's the distribution. And we were given the schus, whatever reason it is, that we are the distributors. The Rabbeim delivered it, the Rabbeim said it, we have it all, but we have to distribute it to the public. It's like a distributor. You don't have to create anything new, you have to distribute it. That is the mission. And of course the Mitteler Rebbe, Yud Kislev, adds a whole new dimension to it, which only accelerated, of course, in the generations next. One final thing I'd like to share, which I remember also very vividly, that same year, Tavshem Amalef, the Fabrenga was Vav Tishrei, and I'm sure there's a video of it, but if not, I'll just depict the picture. The Rebbe was speaking about effort that you need in Limud HaTorah, Zeya, to the point like the Harizal would sweat when he actually learned Gemara and so on. So then he brought that by the Rabbeim we saw shinuyim, differences in their behavior. The Alter Rebbe, for example, the Alter Rebbe was very bispilus, to the point as we know that he would kaikel zich, he would actually roll on the floor when he said Chassidus at times. Rav Pinchas Reizes would go down on the floor to listen. There's even a Maimorim in Hanochas Harap, which is Hanochas of Rav Pinchas, with his 3 dots, because he didn't pick up every word. So the Alter Rebbe was visibly bispilus in an open way. The Mitteler Rebbe was the opposite. He stood and davened, and when he learned, and you didn't see any Chassidus bispilus. It was all within. And the Rebbe then said, told the story that he heard from the Shver, from the Frierdiker Rebbe, that there was a different, the Rabbeim wore a streimlich, but there were different types. There was one which was like a flat yarmulke, so-called, on the streimel, and there was one that has a spitz, like a point. And the Rebbe said that when you look closely, when the Mitteler Rebbe would daven, you'd see that coming out of the point of the hole on top of the streimel, you'd see a vapor. And the Rebbe, he was looking for the right words, how to describe the streimel. He says, Vimeruftasan, and he gave different names for that, Atzukir Hitl, and other things. And the Rebbe Taka, for one of the only times in the Fabrengen, and the Rebbe took his hands and made like a azay. So he went azay, mit Gezen, with the Zeye, the Shveis, Gis Sachareis, the Rebbe made like this and then like that. So I don't know if the video is around of it. I assume it is. I think I once saw it. But I remember when it live, and that was also another example of the Mitteler Rebbe and the Alter Rebbe, a distinction. Now each one has its mila. Just like the Rebbe speaks about the Ushpizin, he speaks about the mila of the Mokeme Altonach, like the Baal Shem Tov traveled around from town to town. The Maggid stayed in his place. The Rebbe, of course, was in his place. Other Rebbeim traveled around. So each one has its mila, each one has its purpose. And here, there's an inyan of his Hispalus Chitzeni, which also expresses itself outward, and then there's an inner, internal one. It's interesting how you reconcile it with Chachma and Bina. Chachma you'd think is far more not be Hispalus because it's so much concentrated and inward, and Bina would seem to be an expression, Srachvus, Hispashtus. But that, again, if anyone has any thoughts on that, please send them in. And with that, let's move on to one more, to the questions and the new questions and some follow-up to previous ones. I want to take this opportunity also to make an exciting announcement. We just upgraded a completely new website, meaningfullife.com. Everything of MyLife is there, easy to find. You just go to the same path, meaningfullife.com/MyLife, and that's where you can find the archives and the new each new episode, and also meaningfullife.com/MyLife/contest, where you can find the essays which we review at the end of each episode. And please go there, and you'll see there a lot of other material, much more organized, far more accessible, and hopefully you can take and benefit from it. Applying Chassidus. Okay, let's begin with a new question, and that is, I should add one more announcement regarding this. I see, register to become a free member. You have to sign up to get the free MP3 downloads of each week's class, or each week's episode. You go to meaningfullife.com/join. So you just need to have your name and email just to be able to keep that connection. So that is one more thing I wanted to add. Okay. Now let's go to a question. The question is, how do you explain the Rebbe Rashab's visit to Freud? Another questioner writes that we see in the Rishimus of the Rebbe more details that were not known earlier, including the fact that Rebbe Rashab, in the language of the Rishima, had nemichas haruach, which means the spirit was down, literally. And he went to Freud. How do you explain this? How do you explain the Rebbe Rashab going to Freud? A plain psychologist, especially a psychologist like Freud, that wasn't exactly known for his refinement and his spiritual nature. Okay, it's a question I've heard a number of times, and it's appropriate to respond, maybe to respond properly, and especially in context of what a Rebbe is. So first of all, let's make something very clear. A Rebbe is a Rebbe. A Rebbe goes somewhere. There's a reason for it. It's not just because he has some type of, God forbid, an illness. Obviously, a Rebbe is an Neshama B'guf, and as I'll soon explain. But you have to remember, especially the story that's written at Rishima, has deeper meaning behind it. It's not just some type of nice information. There's a lesson in it, and there has to be an understanding of what a Rebbe is. I want to share a story I heard, a very powerful story, which is very significant and very negate to this, and perhaps negate even more after Gimel Tammuz. The Tzemach Tzedek, as we know, after the Rebbe Chaim Mushke was nostalgic in Tov Reish Chof Aleph, 5 years before the Tzemach Tzedek was nostalgic. So the Rebbe Chaim Mushke, the Tzemach Tzedek, went to a form of seclusion. Didn't say Maimorim, didn't take pans. He was very, very secluded. Until later, there's a whole letter from the Rebbe how the Chassidim went, and they said that the Torah is called Isha, and was like in a way of reviving him and trying to reconnect with him. Again, analyzing this is not my job, but that's the Metzias. So finally, word came that the Tzemach Tzedek is going to say a Maimach Chassidus. When the Chassidim heard that, it was a big simcha. Rab Hillel Paritcher, who for him was a Maimach Chassidus, was La'ela, who could describe, came to Lubavitch. Now he was already an older man. Remember, he would pass away Yud Aleph of Tofresh Chav Daled. So it was, he came, and they were waiting in Gan Eden HaTachten, which was the room near the Rebbe's room, for the Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek to come out and say the Maimach Chassidus. They waited and waited, nothing happened. After a while, Rab Hillel couldn't stand anymore because of his health situation, had to go out. As he's walking out, he hears two younger lights saying, "No, was kommentar? What could you do?" The Tzemach Tzedek is in a state of whatever, some lashon, some expression they use that should not be used on a Rebbe. So I don't want to repeat what I heard. He's in a state of like a human state, so what could you do? The Rab Hillel heard that. Suddenly he had a surge of new energy, went over to these individuals, and said to them in strong and assertive terms, he said, "Was meint ihr? A Rebbe is eigen a nose mit a moil? What do you think? A Rebbe is eyes, a nose, and a mouth. A Rebbe is a lekus. And when se da a helam af a lekus, se da a helam af a Rebbe. A Rebbe is godliness. And when there's a concealment on godliness, there's a concealment on the Rebbe." That's what he said. So when we talk about a Rebbe, we have to understand exactly that. So I remember, so let's go back now to this story. I remember it was a Rosh Hashanah night. I was in shul, davening ended, and a Chassidus Yid, his name was Avshalom Ber Veshetsky, Olav Avshalom, was there too, and we started a conversation. Shared with me a few stories about my grandfather, a few other things. Then he had a certain type of humorous side to him. He says to me, so what do you think about the shima that came out about Freud and the Rebbe Rashab? And then he goes on and says, and what do you think about so-and-so, and I'm not going to repeat the name, who's saying, no, Pung via Rebbe can have my Kopf Vetik, can have my Etzon Vetik, can have my Fuz Vetik. He could also have a Nemichas Ruach. Just like a Rebbe who's a Basar V'Dam, flesh and blood, and a Shama Beguf can have a toothache, and he can have a footache, and can have a headache, could also have a Nemichas Ruach, a spirit could be down, some form of psychological issue. Said Vozak, and I saw he was being cynical about it. So I said, Vozak dir? So he told me the following. He says, in his opinion, very simple. The beginning of the 20th century, this was Tofrei Samar Gimel. Tofrei Samar Gimel is when this happened, which would be the year 1903, beginning of the century, which would become, in his words, he says, the century of therapy. People would be going to therapy, especially the second half of the century. So the Rebbe Rashab, knowing that the clip of our time is therapy, he went to be Mavara, the father of modern psychoanalysis. So he didn't go for himself, he went to be Mavara him. Sounds good. So I said to him, you know something? What you're saying resonates. As a matter of fact, let me share with you a Rishima from the Rebbe, which is not the Rishimas that were printed later, but a Rishima that's printed in Igris Kodesh. In the Igris Kodesh, there's a letter in volume 6. It's a letter from Chov Tamas Tovshin Yud Beis. It's a Meredika Rishima. The page Kuf Tzadik Ches, 198 in volume 6 of the Rebbe's Igris Kodesh. So he's writing to a Yid called Avram Chaim, I think, Naimark, and he says, in the middle he says, since you talk about your grandfather rather, I'm going to quote a Rishima from me that I heard from my Shver, that definitely you'll be interested in. And here's what he says. I'm reading straight from this Rishima. Rab Zalman Naimark is given a Rov in Stradov. He was a Rov. Zalman Naimark, this man's grandfather, was a Rov in Stradov. When they came to make a Bilbul of Zayden under Reb Marash, they came to basically make a libel. The libel of the Zayden, like to arrest him, connected to some type of blood libel. Hat das genommen auf sich. The Zalman Naimark took upon himself the blame, saying, the Gzaina Ashah, the Rebbe's Ashah, the Rebbe's an hour. And he sat in prison several years, because he took upon himself so the Rebbe shouldn't be accused. Then he continues in the Rishima, when he heard the Maimer from the Rebbe Rashab, so this would be years later, from the Maimer Kol Hanena, that's Tofresh Nun Beis, hat gesagt, Rab Zalman Naimark said, Im Chaloi Chafatzti, which is of course the expression Alter Rebbe used, Im Chaloi Chafatzti, Ich darf Mashiach nit. I don't need Mashiach. And the Rebbe brings an order, moving al Pisha microcosm. You can understand this based on that Leinu Savu, the Rambam. At the end it says that the reason that they did not desire Mashiach for its pleasantries, but in order to know God. So basically he had that. Ot itz nichlo werden in Atzmus. That's his words. Now to be encompassed in Atzmus. As they left the table, the Rebbe Rashab went in Wasser, he went to the mikveh. Is the Tata Arain Alein. The Frierdiker Rebbe is saying this, and this is the Rebbe writing the Rishima. My father went alone into the mikveh. We all stood outside, waiting outside. So the Zalman said, mit Loshen HaRambam. The Rambam said, with Loshen HaRambam, Loi v'loi ha-mikveh metayer. Elexeda, what's the Loshen HaRambam? That it's not dirt, God forbid, and it's not the water that's metayer, it's the Eibush that is metayer. V'ich bin ha'id, as the mikveh dafem, nit the mikveh. It's an expression. As I am a Jew, I say to you, the mikveh needs him, the Rebbe, not that he needs the mikveh. But gzeira gazati chukah chakakti. But that's the decree, that it should be this way, that he should go into the water. So I said to Shalom Ber, I said to him, no, that supports what you're saying, that he went to Freud, not he needs Freud. Freud needs him. However, what's pshat in the Rishim? That's not pshat. That's a nice interpretation, and maybe the deeper reason, but he did go, it says, for a reason. Now some people say that he went because he had an issue with his left hand, and it was more of a neurological issue than a psychological one. But the Lashon is Nemichas Ruach, you can't deny that. And it doesn't say, in other places it speaks about the left hand and so on. Anyway, and he says clearly that, to me the Frierdiker Rebbe says, my father, the Rebbe Rashab, didn't speak to me, but he spoke to my mother about it. and complained that after all the years of Avodah, nevertheless his midas are not complete. And his askola is not so clear. And he can't really concentrate. And at the same time that Friedrich Rebbe says, and that was the same year when in the winter I saw how much he's concentrating in learning, and then it came out, in Tes-Yud Kislev that year, that he said those Maimorim of Melodic Maimorim. So then anyway, he says that winter he went to Vienna, to ask Eitzah for doctors. And he was by the doctor Freud. This is what Freud responded to the Rebbe Rashab. And then we'll go back to answering the question. He said to him, the Kopf begreift was the Herz vertrocknet. When the Herz vertrocknet was the Kopf begreift. The mind begreift, but the mind captures what the heart cannot contain. And the heart cannot contain what the mind captures, the mind understands. And he gave the Rebbe Rashab Eitzah that you should go back into a comfortable, pleasant environment where they learn your words and your teachings, and you'll see that they should let you know how much they need you and your teachings. That will waken up. The Regesh HaReim was benafshe, a sense of self. Regesh HaReimus is usually an element of grandeur, but a Regesh HaReim was not so being self-fold and not so being the Bichas HaRuach, the opposite of that, but to be proud and to be uplifted and in a spirit, in a positive spirit of it all. That's what it says in the Rishim. It says they were in Wien and about 3 months. So here comes the question, of course. We understand the beer that maybe the premise was that, but how do you explain this? Well, my friends, you explain it very simple. It doesn't require much. You have in the Torah Moshe Rabbeinu, and it's Pashtus the Moshe B'chol Dor. You find also at Michas Ruach. The spirit fell down when Keirach challenged him in other places, and he came running to the Eibishter. Moshe Rabbeinu, the Erste Rebbe. Mamutza Machaber. We also understand that's not just a type of, our spirit falls down. We have to understand, if his Rebbe is a Rebbe, like Shmuel Munke said, Eibishter Rebbe, that gar nicht schatten eb nicht, the famous Rishim on that as well, a Rebbe is a Rebbe, a Lekus. A Lekus is a Helamaf for Rebbe, as I mentioned before. And it's not that complicated to explain it. Once you have the axiom what a Rebbe is, Chassidus explains that the word chela means ill, the ill person, sick person, is gematria memtes. Chela is memtes 49. Why? Because 49 is missing that one gate. I mentioned 50 shari bina, the 50 gates of bina. Missing one, shamisha shari bechosar achas, is memtes. What's the chela? Chela is ave. That he feels ill, that he doesn't have the 50th gate. Now, who's reached 49 gates? Moshe Rabbeinu. So it says, in the Maggid has a Torah on Nahar Nevoy. Why is Nevoy Nun Boy, the heart that Moshe Rabbeinu goes up in his last time? Because Nun Boy, when he came to his Talkas of Moshe, when he was 120 years old, that Zayin that Moshe reached Nun Boy, Chashara Chamish. Until then, there was still an element of Chela, because he's missing that 50th gate. And we use the same word chela on, God forbid, a person is pashat sig b'gashmis. Now the Rebbe Rashab lives in being a Rebbe and Ashama Klolis. We know that it says in Chassidus brings from the Talmidei Arizal. Why did Arizal say al chet? Look at the al chet. Arizal shaykh to any of those? But so it says 2 reasons. Number 1, bedakus the dakus, he has it in some subtle way. And number 2, because he's in Ashama Klolis, he has to have it subtle way because he's encompasses the whole generation. So therefore, everything that's in the generation, he has to fix. So it's for the generation that he's saying. The famous story with the Mitteler Rebbe, where he stopped the Yechidus because he couldn't find within his own soul, at least bedaka, somewhere in the most subtle form, something terrible someone did. Not in the same way. Because he can't give advice to someone unless you find it within you, because that's what a neshama klolis is. And then when he found it and was mesakin it, prepared it within himself, he was able to resume the Yechidus. The Rebbe Rashab is a Rebbe, a neshama klolis. And therefore, when the generation is suffering, in a very megushim dika way, by a Rebbe, there could be the missing the Shar Nun. So you say in the Michas Ruach, it's as simple as that. The Fi Erech Shar Hanun, the Gula is not here. You can imagine that caused a lot of aggravation to the Rebbe. Aggravation like we have. We have aggravation over shtusim, over narishkeiten, over nonsense. We're talking here the missing Shar Hanun, that Moshe got in the last day of his life. So that in the Michas Ruach, the Fi Erech. So why does he have to go to a psychologist for that? You see, even Freud did not say to him, take a pill, God forbid, or some other, go on the couch. He said to him, Aces of Chassidus, that the mind is too great for the heart to contain, the heart is too much. You see here a Kles HaNefesh almost element, a Cheles Av, that he sensed, and he said, then reconnect with your Chassidim. See that they need you, see that you are their Rebbe, etc. So you just see from the response. Why Freud had to say it? Either mitzad luvush teva, you have to go to a doctor just to do the shus l'rei for the rapes. But even Freud, with all whatever he was, clearly picked up that we're talking here about an edler thing, a subtle thing. So this doesn't need any stretch of imagination. You just have to have that munna pshuta that a Rebbe is a Rebbe. So when you hear a story like this, you don't have to get frightened. Oi, what does it mean? And let's hide the story. You have to simply understand, a Rebbe is a Rebbe, so da helm of the Welt, yes. And then, it stems very well. The generation Taka would be going into a very serious dysfunctional psychological state as we see today. So a Rebbe, but the Dakas has something of it, maybe just missing the Shad Hanun. And to make a tikkun, he goes to the so-called Via Veis, I don't know if you can call him that, the so-called father of psychoanalysis. And that way is mavada maybe every psychologist and psychoanalyst and analyst that exists today, even those that detractors from Freud, but he still remains the dominant presence. And we know that Rebbe did not hold from his shita, that Rebbe talks about Viktor Frankl and so on. But the point is, it can all be explained if you just go with the axiom and muskel rishon instead of being megashim a Rebbe. Understand that a Rebbe is a elokus in our guf, and at the same time has in his own level, like we say, chet melosh chsadin about Avram Avinu, the Rebbe brings in the sichas. Chaz v'sholem a chet kipshute, and even chsadin lefiyerech, what he could have done, it's something, a drop. And as long as the gula is, ain't tzaddik be'oretz asher yaseh teva lo yechta, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, that even the tzaddik, the greatest tzaddik, ava v'yira, down here can't be the way it is l'mayla, because there is forta guf and other hakbolas gashman. Okay. Now let's move on. Going over to a completely different subject. Burnout. Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. Do you have advice about how to stay inspired, not just as an individual, but as a community leader? I've been leading my community for many years now. As time goes on, I am less and less inspired. It is noticeably impacting my work and rendering me incapable of inspiring others and having a positive influence on them. I imagine this is an issue faced by very different rabbis, teachers, and other community leaders. How do you suggest we keep the fire burning within in order to light the world around us? So I've definitely spoken about individual so-called burnout, or individual way for individuals how to maintain inspiration and how to connect. Obviously, it's compounded when you're dealing with a leader, because others are dependent on you, and if there's a little drop in your own enthusiasm, of course it's going to impact. So, as a matter of fact, just reading the story with Freud, I just realized that you have the answer right there. Even though this may be shalei lishma, the fact of the matter is when a person feels needed, they always perform more. I've seen different notes in Setlach from the Rebbe where he makes that point. He says, when you're down, atzvus, you're feeling any depressed, one of the ways is not to think about yourself and think about what are you doing for others. So the first thing is to realize that you have in your community people who need you. So even if you're down, what does it have to do with you? How could you deprive them? So maybe you have to find some of the people that really are in need, whether it's learning, whether it's inspiration, and that if you're a person that's conscientious and sensitive, and you see someone has a need, how could you deprive them? You're going to say, I'm not in the mood. So that's number one, reconnecting with the people and their needs. Number two, it's important to initiate new things. Everybody falls into a funk. It's called mitzvah sanoshim ulamada, getting into a rut of when it's routine. And a community leader is not immune to that. And it's understandable as well. You work hard. At some point, you just feel like you're doing the same thing and you don't necessarily see all the fruits of your labor. So doing some new initiative and getting community people involved, even if though you may not be in the mood, just force it. Then you have to deliver, because you have to show up and you see others are involved. That's suggestion number two. Suggestion number three is the fact that I was just saying that people start doing, you don't feel fruit of your labor. You have to realize that fruit are always happening. You see this consistently from the Rebbe, to shluchim who fell down or felt they weren't accomplishing. Said, how could you say that? You've accomplished, touched so many people. So it's important to see the fruits of our labor, but also know that you plant a seed and the fruit is not always seen that moment. It's number 3. And number 4 is learning examples from our leaders themselves. The Rebbe, anyone that was a mashpia or anybody, and you look at them and see how their motivation, that itself is a very inspiring thing. And finally, we have to feed ourselves like anything with fuel. The most important thing for a leader is to learn, to study, to be challenged. Don't rely just on what you learned when you were in school or in your early years of your career. Make a kviyas, learn with a chaver, maybe another rabbi, maybe another community leader. It could be with people in your community, but somewhere where you're challenged. At the end of the day, mitzvahs are technically repeated. Obviously, every mitzvah has its own kavanah and it should be done chadoshim and new. But at the end of the day, it's an action, and action has become routine-like. Learning is stimulation of the mind and the heart, and doing that can create new energy. It's like new fuel. Then there's, of course, what we always learn is about Meshana Mokum, Meshana Mazel. In this case, Meshana Mokum doesn't mean you can move away because you're a community that you have to serve. But Meshana Mokum sometimes means a mindset. Have a different mindset, a shift of schedule. Do something different. Maybe start exercising. Maybe start running. Maybe do something that energizes you in a different way. So when you start breaking the routine in one way, it generally creates new energy in other ways, because that's how it works. Sometimes you can't change the thing that is most routine-like, so change something else in your life that's a little easier, and change breeds change. These are some suggestions, and I definitely welcome anyone who is hearing this to submit your own, again at meaningfullife.com/MyLife. There's the anonymous form, or send an email to us. You can send it to me, simon@meaningfullife.com. And if anyone has thoughts, suggestions, or something that you've seen that I could share with everybody. Okay. Next question. I'm a convert, and I'm happily married to a Jewish man since 1993. My conversion took place in 1986, and was through an Orthodox rabbi who has since passed away. I was actually raised as Jewish, as my father was Jewish, but when I became of marrying age, I realized that I needed to officially convert in order to be able to marry as a Jew. So in 1986, I learned with a rabbi and went to the mikveh before a Beth Din. It took less than 1 year because I was really always aware, always Jewish in my mind and practice. Even though I was not Shomer Shabbos, nor did I eat kosher all the time. I've been allowed the privilege of dunking in the mikveh, and let's call it sealing the deal. Fast forward 30 years. My husband and I married in 1993. We were already on the road to becoming Chassidim, Lubavitchers, and we are now fully observant Chassidim in every way. We have 4 children who are all in various stages in the system, and they all know their mother's history. My eldest son, who is now 21, is extremely devoted to a Torah life and the Rebbe. He has recently brought up the validity of my conversion because I was not 100% keeping mitzvahs at the time I converted. From the moment of my studying for my conversion and my subsequent conversion, I was climbing the ladder and always becoming more and more observant, but that is not enough for my son. He's afraid that I am not Jewish, and he's afraid that he is therefore not Jewish. He's obsessed with fear and overcome with grief, and that he is not Jewish. He says that God doesn't want him, and he goes around in a constant state of feeling inferior to those born to a Jewish mother. I'm heartbroken to see him like this and to hear his cries. There's also the fear that maybe he is on to something. Is it possible that I'm not Jewish? Is it possible that my children are not Jewish? Thank you. I don't know all the details of the situation, but let me say unequivocally. If an Orthodox rabbi converted you and knew all these circumstances, and even if he didn't, but he converted you what he knew, you're completely Jewish, and it's not even a question. To confirm that, I usually don't like to deal with halachic issues, but you could check this with any rabbi, and based on what you're saying, if there was an Orthodox conversion, then you are completely Jewish, and you can't turn the clock back. Period. God forbid, even a convert who afterwards was a little more lax, if there was a gir ka'alocha, that just because you become lax, you can't, just like a Jew who's a born Jew becomes lax, doesn't make them as Jewish, God forbid. So you can tell your son and console him, go to a rabbi, take him to a rabbi, and make it very, very clear, because it is a very haunting thought, But there's absolutely no basis for it based on what you that's why I chose to read this and to respond, because if anyone else has questions like this, you have to remember there are Torah. The Torah tells us, not our own feelings. The fact that if only your father was Jewish, the fact that you were lax in some mitzvahs, that's part of the mitzvah. But that's not what determines it. The rabbi converted, you have to look at the halacha. If halacha is conversion, it's halacha conversion. And it should be very, very absolute and unequivocal so your son can feel calmed by the fact. Now, should it show up that the rabbi says that the conversion was not, you could always go through a conversion. And so can your son, if necessary. I don't even want to bring that up. I'm just saying that there's solutions to all of this. To go into a state of such depression is really not healthy. And I hope if you're listening to this, and this is relevant, who takes these words seriously. Take your son and go to a competent Rav, and you'll hear what he has to say. That way, that should put everything aside. That should put all worries and concerns. It should eliminate all worries and concerns. And my heart goes out to you, and also for yourself. Don't feel that it's true, but establish this. Should something come up that I'm not aware of, or that I'm not picking up here, obviously based on what I'm saying here, this forum is not a psak halacha. I cannot rule on Jewish law in this type of situation. You have to know who you are and have to speak to a competent rabbi. So that's why I'm encouraging you to do that. But I'm still stating what I'm stating because it's important not to start getting overwhelmed. Life is difficult enough. Start getting overwhelmed by questions and doubts that have no basis. Okay, next question. Children making different choices. Rabbi Jacobson, thank you for all your shiurim and for addressing topics of great relevance. Unfortunately, a few of my children seem to be rejecting the Torah way of life. 2 questions. I try to keep in touch with them regularly and speak with them by phone every 2 weeks. They never come home anymore. I tried to keep the conversations pleasant and talk about what's new and things like that. To what extent should I try to convince them of Hashem's role in our lives and try to get them to do a small mitzvah? I'm afraid they might feel that I'm pressuring them. Number 2, what advice can you give me about how to deal with the deep and continual pain this situation causes me? Thank you. Okay, my heart goes out to you. And let's begin with this. And this is coming from many different directives from the Rebbe in situations that are similar. The love and connection of a parent to a child and a child to a parent is immutable, impossible to sever. Meaning it's always there and will always remain there. Your children need you, you need them. It's sad that sometimes circumstances lead people in different directions, but that connection is the key to everything. So you have to maintain it in every possible way and keep it going, pleasant and so on. I would not look to smuggle in a mitzvah here and there. If you do anything, it should be more upfront and open, not manipulative, not like, oh, by the way, maybe this. It should be straightforward. Because children are your children, and it's not healthy that they should start feeling they have to avoid you because you're going to manipulate them into anything. So I would do everything very honestly, transparently, very nonchalantly, not make a big deal of anything, because they're sensitive more than you may know to your choices, to your lifestyle and their lifestyle and the differences. You don't have to bring it up. So I think I would maintain constant love, constant kindness, keep the door open. Now, like in any situation, that doesn't mean you have to agree about everything. But even a disagreement, should it come up, has to be spoken about in cordial and in pleasant ways. It should not be a confrontation. It should not be a situation that creates tensions and hostilities, because then what you're doing is cutting off their ability to really connect and remain connected. So that's the biggest mitzvah of all. Don't think that's not a mitzvah. When you connect with your children, no matter what, that's a mitzvah. So to suggest that, I'm doing that, but everything else is compromised. No. One thing will bring the other. As far as your own guilt goes, look, the bottom line is guilt does not drive the world, and guilt is not a Torah concept. If the guilt brings you to be motivated to become a better person, great. But the guilt is more about yourself than about them. And that's very, very important to remember. So I don't have a solution to suddenly not feel bad. I understand you feel bad. You have to remember God's mysterious ways. You don't know the long, big picture, the story. And you have to keep the betach and the trust open and recognize these are your children. You planted seeds. And hope and pray for the best that they will ultimately grow into healthy adults and marry and build a good, healthy lives of their own. That's what you have to focus on. Any type of negative feelings can only cloud and not allow you to really be there completely in the positive way. You may need to talk to someone about this. When a person has concerns, that's one of the ways is to talk about it, discuss it. And sometimes that people can give you a little, soothe you, and they can give you strength and dealing with it. But you have to remember that the most important thing is that they're your children, they should be healthy. And mitzvah geredes mitzvah. Mitzvahs include things like kindness, charity, visiting the sick, inviting guests. Sometimes the mitzvahs that we see some people not doing, and everyone should do every mitzvah, should not forget that they have other mitzvahs that they're doing. And if they are actually kind people and helping others, that's also a mitzvah. A mitzvah geredes mitzvah, one mitzvah brings the next. The main thrust, as you can see from what I'm saying, is you have to take the positive attitude, as he says in Tanya, is part of every healing. Even when the situation seems to warrant or seems to bring out a negative attitude. Because positivity makes you stronger, you're able to fight battles, you're able to withstand challenges, and that spills over. That positivity spills over into their lives. I don't know all the details of the relationship, and I'm sure there's more to it than just Torah, mitzvahs, and Yiddishkeit, but if you have a healthy, psychologically, emotional relationship, functional with your children, that always has a positive impact and will spill over into other elements of growing and so on. This should help, that it should be faster than later. But you can do your part, and there's no question that the more energy, positive energy you bring there, the more they will respond in some one way or other. Kamayim haponim laponim, kein leva adam la adam. A heart, just as a face is reflected in water, one heart's reflected in another, especially a mother and her children. Okay. Let me follow up on another question. I did want to mention about the dress code. I've discussed this as well in earlier chapters. This is a topic of last week's episode. Earlier episodes 18 and 85, where I discussed dress code as well. So that complements what I discussed in episode 90. Just a footnote to be thorough and complete. But I want to go over with the sefiros. I promised and I said that I would continue the discussion of the colors of the sefiros, and some of you actually wrote that you're really looking forward to that. So let me do exactly that. So in last episode I spoke about from the Shar HaGvonim, the gate of colors from the Pardes of Ramak, which, by the way, the Ramak also writes about it in his sefer called Eir Yokar, which is another book, Eir Yokar and Eir Nerav, that he writes about this. But Pardes is the final say, so to speak, where he collected all of that and brought it out more elaborately. So we discussed that the role of colors should not be anthropomorphized into thinking that the spheres, God forbid, are colors. Colors is a physical reality, but the colors manifest the personality of their archetypes in the spheres. And through the colors you can come to understand the spheres, and it reflects the pu'ulas, the actions of the spheres. So as we mentioned, fire is reddish. Obviously in Atzilus or in the higher worlds, in spiritual worlds, even Nasir Ruchnis, it's not physical fire. But it's the attributes of fire as being frightening, or fire as being reddish, as being threatening, and so on. The same thing with chesed and water. In addition, and this is something I addressed many episodes back, I don't recall when I spoke about the Tzemach Tzedek's letter that he writes about having a positive attitude. It's a very psychological letter from the Tzemach Tzedek where he writes how the Alter Rebbe taught him the lesson. One of the last things the Alter Rebbe told him that Motzei Shabbos, Eilich of the Dalet Tevis, the Stalkus of the Alter Rebbe, that you have to have your attitude affects your reality. And he brings there from the Pardes, this same Pardes, that when you envision certain colors, when you envision certain images, it actually brings on that experience. So I just wanted to make that connection as well. But we didn't get to is what are the actual colors represent? The spheres. And what colors? So I mentioned briefly Likutei Torah and Shir HaShirim, the Rebbe cites it in the Maimer and Bos Lagani, the three main colors, which is the Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes. But let's elaborate a bit more and about the colors. And the Shar HaGvonim is a little more complicated than you may think. It's not just a black and white, no pun intended, color for each sphere. The spheres have a lot of interconnectivity and they have overlap and so on. But I'll give you a summary for what he says in the Pardes, and it's consistent, obviously, how Chassidus cites elements of these as I'll mention. So let's start with, we're going from Keser through Malchus, briefly. So Keser, and no Das, because when we count Keser, we don't count Das. So for now, we're not going to get into Das, which I have to do with my own research, because he doesn't bring Das in the Seif Shara Gvonim. Keser. So he says there are 3 levels in Keser. There's a colorless dimension to Keser. That's how Keser is on its own. Then there's a second level in Keser, as Keser relates to the sefiros. So you'll know that Keser has Atik, and then there's Keser that has Arich. So there's Keser that is removed from so-called existence, and there's Keser as it relates to existence. That's the colors. So the higher one is colorless, and the next one is transparent, pure white, like crystal or dew. These are examples as he used. Keser relating to the sefiros. Of course, if that's then Atik game, we say Levusheh Ketlag Chiver. Atik game Yosef al Krusaya, the one of ancient days, sitting on his throne, and Levusheh and her garments, Ketlag Chiver, are white like snow. Plag is white, so he says that's the garments, but not Keser itself. So that's the garments of Atik as it relates to the lower levels. So basically, there are 2 elements therefore in Keser so far, and that is one is colorless and one that takes on the color of white. And he gives the example like dew. Dew is liquid, but as it descends and gets thickened in the lower sefiros, it freezes like the glacier, like Kerach HaGodl as he puts it, or like crystal, and assumes the pure transparent white color. So in the world of colors, Chassidus explains, in the Ayin Beis that I mentioned in other places, white is the purest of colors. So there's a colorless state in the higher level of Keser, and then there's the color of Keser, which is white, pure white. Then there's a third time. Sometimes it says that Keser is black and dark. Ucham. Ucham hu kodem ilas ha'ilus. That's how Keser is in its mokir. Not only in its, so there's Keser to itself, Keser as it relates to the lower spheres, and Keser as in its, and there it's concealed in the source. And it doesn't contradict that well, because it's concealed from the lower levels due to its being united and encompassed in its source. And then he goes on to explain that in darkness itself, there's 3 levels, which I won't go into right now because it's too complicated. That's Keser. So Keser is either colorless or white, the pure white, the crystal, or black and dark, which is not a contradiction because it's dark compared to lower, but it's bright when it goes into its source. Chachma. Chachma, essentially, he sums up, has different elements in it, but you can say it's a combination of transparent sapphire blue. Blue is sapphire, but it's not pure blue. It's a light type of blue. So he says the following. He goes through all the different options. He says sapphire, in some places, which absorbs all colors. Then sometimes blue, tchelis, from the word tachlis, purpose, because Chachma captures the purpose of all the spheres, because it's the first sphere. And he says blue is the first channel and door that opens darkness to the world of colors. So if you go from the world of colorlessness, or darkness, like we said before, that's beyond color, because it's encompassed in its source, the bridge between no color and color, that's blue. So since Chachma is the first door that opens and reflects Keser to the spheres, so that's why it has that element of blueness. Okay. Even though he makes it clear that blue will be used later spheres, but that's the source of it all. And then he says there's one other place where it says that Chachma includes all 7 colors: red, white, yellow, green, leek, which is dark green, blue, aqua, and Kodesh Kadoshim, which radiates to all of them, but he doesn't say what color, but he says these 7. Okay. Bina. Now, Bina is either yellow or gold or greenish. He negates that some say it's red, white. The green like leek or grass. That's one. Also green indicates like Bina, which is the early stages of development. Every fruit is green before it ripens. Okay? And yellow mixed with blue, or red, white mixed with blue, yields also green. These are the different ways this is Bina. So again, you see, spheres have sometimes more than one connection to color because depending on the role of that sphere. Let's go to Chesed. Chesed is white, or whitish blue, because it's derived from Chachma, because it's on the right side, Chachma Chesed. It's not white, pure white, like Keser's white. unless it gets a special flow from Keser, so it's more like silver. That's what he says. So it goes on Kesef. So it's whitish blue, basically. So white, but mostly white. Gvura is red. He says everybody agrees with that. And yet in some places associates it with black, which is like a very dark blue. And a very dark red. And in some places with blue. But not blue as in Chochmah, blue as in Tchelis from the word Tichla, which means to extinguish, to die. Tichla is a koloyan. Okay. And this is a little more complicated, so I'm not going to go through the whole elements of Gvura. He basically says that there are 3 dimensions in Gvura. Gvura as it's closer to Rachamim, because remember, Chesed, Gvura, Teferis. So then it's more conciliatory, so it's closer to white. There's the second level of is intense Gvura, which is dark and foreboding, is dark red. And functionary Gvura, which really keeps the balance between Chesed and Gvura, is bluish. Okay. Fine. Then comes Teferis. Teferis is light green, but sometimes a combination of red and white, which is like light green. Because it combines Chesed and Gvura. Sometimes it also refers to sapphire. And sometimes green is a combination of red and blue. He also says it's a level of Argomon. So Argomon, as we know, is its own discussion. But Argomon is usually a combination of many colors, like a type of rainbow. So he says it's the acronym for Uriel, Raphael, Gavriel, Michal, Neriel, which goes on white, red, green, red, white, and Malchus. Okay. Netzach is red that leans toward white. Hoid is white that leans toward red. Yesod is sapphire, similar to Teferis, and it combines white and red, the white that leans to the red and the red that leads to the white, which is the Hoid and the Netzach. And finally he says that it's like Yosef. Yosef, it says Yafas Teir v'Yafas Mara, is a color that encompasses all the colors, so it is like a type of multicolored. Finally, Malchus. Malchus is also encompass all the colors because everything goes through Malchus, just like everything goes through Yesod. Sometimes it's associated to a dark black because that's when the moon is in its phase when it's diminished. And sometimes it's blue, indicating on intense judgment. And then he explains that based on the Zohar, there's 3 things in Malchus, like in Keser. Its core color is white, reflecting the sun. Its garment, Sheish Vargoman Levusha, is it combines Sheish, all 6 spheres, so all the colors. And its lowest garment is closer to the Klippus, and that's the Mitzulas Hayam, that refers to dark blue. And he brings the Gemara, the Gemara that speaks to how to distinguish between leek, when you say Kriya Shema, when you can distinguish between Chelis and Karti, which is leek. What does that mean? When the sun begins to pierce the darkness, so the dark blue night starts becoming greenish before the next level, and that's how the light of the sun breaks through the darkness of the night of Malchus as it relates to Klippus. Now this was a little Kabbalistic. I know it's not Chassidus Applied exactly, but I'll tell you where the Chassidus Applied fits in here, and that is that knowing these colors helps us then identify, as I said last episode, the personality and the emotions and the psychological reactions we have to different colors. For example, red light. Its effect on us. So colors is something that's part of our reality. Everywhere we look, there's something with color. So it's a way of taking these more abstract spheres and relating to them in our existence. I just wanted to go through this, and it's a little different than I usually do, but I hope this was helpful. And you can all look it up in Pardes directly. Fine. Being time is running short, let me go to the Chassidus Question of the week, and then to the essays. So what is the Chassidus Question of this week? An interesting question. I'm learning in Likutei Diburim where the Rebbe talks a lot about koyach hadimyan. Koyach hadimyan, he says imagination. Koyach hadimyan also means like koyach hatzir, to be able to depict, to visualize something. I have 2 questions. Which faculty of the 10 spheres does imagination come from? 2, please clarify the garment of machshava. Is machshava a processor for the 3 intellectual faculties? My recollection of the Likutei Diburim is there's two things. There's imagination, which means to be able to almost like fantasize, not necessarily in a positive way. Imagine something. Imagine the world of Mashiach. Imagine a pure world than ours. Children are very masters of imagination, imagining things that are more than the real, what we see in this reality. But koyach hadimyan could also be the koyach the koyach hatzir, to visualize, to see things like with your eyes that may be invisible ideas, to some way visualize them. If we use imagination, then I would say in Ayin Beis he talks about chokhmah and bina. He says bina is hasaga, comprehension. Chokhmah, he says, is not really seichel. It's not because it's not. It's koyach hariyah, koyach haisamtus, the ability to see something and the reality that it creates in you, the resonance of an idea. So you could perhaps say that maybe this is also connected to that, or it may be connected. Therefore, then you'd place this element to the higher levels of chokhmah as it reaches into kesed, or you could place it maybe even higher if it's imagining. So it's the mind going somewhat outside of the realm of pure mathematical or empirical understanding of something, and imagining what's possible. In that context, imagining what's possible, then it probably would be somewhere where Kesed and Chokhmah meet, if you had to place it on the map. But I would want to look it up more, but that's what I would say regarding that. Regarding the second question, well, we know it goes like this. The human being has 10 faculties, which nishtalshel, as he says in Tanya, they evolve from the 10 divine attributes. Chabad and Chagas Nehim. 3 intellectual, 7 emotional. Okay. Then we have 3 garments. What is garments? A garment means, just like a garment, it's not an inherent part of you. You can change a garment. You could put on a jacket, take off a jacket. Put on a shirt, take off a shirt. Same thing, machshava, dibur, and maisa are empty shells like hanging in a closet, clothing. But they are necessary because they're the only 3 ways you can express faculties. For example, koyach ha-chokhmah bina das is pure brain power. You may have that, and you could be asleep, or you may not using your mind. Machshava is the active process of taking a faculty and expressing it. Machshava is expression to yourself. Dibur is expression to others. And Maisa is expression through creating something, through writing something, some way to impart it outside of yourself. These are the only 3 ways we humans can express ourselves. Either expression to yourself, expression to another, or expression through some third outside element. So Machshava in that context is simple. It's how it is the expressor. When you're thinking of an idea right now, a concept that you're right now conscious of, where are all the other ideas in your mind that you were thinking of a moment before, you could be thinking about tomorrow? They're there. They're stored in your hard drive, but you haven't retrieved them. Retrieval is what a garment does. It retrieves it. So machshava is the process of you concentrating and thinking about that thing very deliberately. In Tanya Perek Yud Beis he says, hirur is the thought that's inadvertent. But machshava is a deliberate thought, once you're able to actually, which you are focusing and concentrating on. As soon as you stop thinking about this idea, the idea goes back, so to speak, into its hard drive. It's still there, but it's not, you can't put it into a garment dimension, which is an expression. So you may have someone, for example, that's extremely brilliant, but they're either shy or they have difficulty expressing themselves. And some people confuse that with being stupid, when it's not the case. They could just not be expressing, or they may have a speech impediment, God forbid, or something else that's not allowing them to express, as I said, shyness. So machshava is the ability basically you can say development and growth of a human being is the ratio between your faculties and your expression of those faculties. The more you express, obviously, the more you reach deep into it. So think of the faculties as being like the water inside the well, down below, and the garments are like the pail that draws the water. Machshava to yourself, dibur to another, and maisa outside of yourself. Okay, 3 essays. We'll do the first is the Avodah plan by Mushka Winner, 27, Melbourne, Australia. Again, very wonderful essays. They are posted at meaningfullife.com/MyLife/contest, and as well as if you subscribe to our weekly newsletter, we announce the new essays as they come along. This is called the Avodah plan. It begins, the 1960s brought a burst of discovery and discussion about the importance of self-esteem for one's health and success. And that became a dominant reality in Western societies and in America. Then, in 2011, the Tiger Mother book came out by Amy Chua, criticizing the American model as being the feel-good model. And she claims that the Chinese system produces more productive and impressive people, more in quality and in quantity than the American system. Because the Americans are distracted and obsessed with self-esteem. The Chinese system is focused on discipline, hard work, and high standards. So, very two different models. So this essay goes on, so which model is the Torah Chassidus model? And here's your answer. Chassidus says work hard. Try hard. Fight hard. Don't worry about the successes and don't worry about the failures. Those are important, but not as important as work. Work is your goal and work is your success. In Chassidus, it is called Avodah. And it continues, I invite you to be impressed, moved, and thrilled by the remarkable Avodah plan. And essentially, combining both, self-esteem is not a contradiction to Avodah. It could become if you only have one without the other. And a very nice essay, very creatively written, talks about the commitment, devotion model, she calls it, that the Baal Shem Tov introduced, which was not just a Torah scholar and scholarship and academic knowledge, but also devotion, Avodah, and how the Alter Rebbe developed that even further in Tanya and Chassidus Bechlal, Chassidus Chabad. It's not a short essay, relatively speaking, and then really spells it out in very practical ways of how each of us, and how this helps in every area of our lives, whether it comes to child rearing or counseling and self-help, and how the effort model, as she writes, is critical to the whole thing process. And yes, self-esteem alone, feel good, is definitely not sufficient. So that's essay number 1. Essay number 2 is The Path to Purpose by Moshe Bachman, age 24, Koil, Crown Heights. Being an educator of Jewish youth and teenagers, I often encounter questions regarding the necessity for the fulfillment of various Jewish practices. Why do we need to do this mitzvah, that mitzvah? And his basic premise here is to take Chassidus and it teaches us that it's not just about actions, but it's understanding the soul and its expression in this world. And goes through a discussion of Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chai, Yechida, quoting different Maimorim, Samach Tasamach, in Tofresh, that's Nun Zayin, and another Maimorim from that year, in discussing how one climbs this ladder, and how that in turn informs the Torah mitzvahs that one does. So it touches the very essence and core of who you are. And that's what ultimately is happiness. So it's not happiness, I don't like doing this, let me do something else. It's ultimately finding and discovering your inner self expressing itself. Okay, so that's essay number 2. And finally, essay number 3 for this episode, The Gift of a Broken Heart, by Gail Gitti Wisner, age 40, health coach, Crown Heights. This is a long essay, but a very practical one. My assumption why the judges did not give it one of the top scores, even though it's in the top 100, is because but maybe because it's not developing an idea in Chassidus, even though it's citing many sources of Chassidus, but it's extremely strong on its personal application, and very, very candid, and the reader discretion advised in discussing the abuse that she endured and how she healed. But in a very step-by-step way, first describing loss of innocence, the journey begins, the real journey, and literally titles like that, how Chassidus helped to grow through her soul, grow through this, and with the practical tools, 20 tools for living a life of joy, peace, love, and connection, including daily meditation, daily gratitude, surrounding yourself with positive and inspiring people, eating whole foods, obtaining a mentor, writing an evening review, prayer, total surrender to God's will, daily movement, practicing mindfulness, repairing the wreckage of the past, revisiting my landmarks, rigorous honesty, deep integrity, simplicity, the circle of friends, having friends, a commitment to personal growth, taking time to be with nature, thinking positively always, give and you shall receive. Very well worth reading, especially for people who may have gone through this, but I think for anyone, The Gift of a Broken Heart. And with that, we conclude episode 91. Again, good Yontiv. This has been Yud Kislev. This is Yud Kislev. May we be marchiv and mefitz, Chassidus, in the broadest possible way, in reaching every corner of the earth and fulfilling the Mitteler Rebbe's wish that wherever we meet, whoever we talk to, we talk about Chassidus, we talk about Keser and Atik Anarich and Yichudi Lo Yichudi Tata, and understanding these deep concepts as we understand the fingers on our hand, the deepest concepts. And until next week, this has been again MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 91, every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Everyone have a very blessed week in this Chassidus Geula of Kislev, as Yud Kislev leads to Tes-Yud Kislev, the birth of a Chassid to the bris of a Chassid, and we shall continue this journey. Thank you very much.